Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You're listening to the Locked On Broncos podcast, hosted by Cody Roark, your daily Broncos podcast.
Welcome into Locked On Broncos. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a special crossover episode here this week. We're going through the AFC West Division rivals, teams that the Broncos play, and I'm joined today by David Droegemeier of Locked On Chargers, and we're talking about the Broncos in the division. We're talking about the Chargers. There's a lot of questions. There's a lot of ties that bind. David, thanks so much for joining me here today, my man.
Hey, absolutely. Always good to talk some football. I mean, hey, we're going to be playing each other a lot. I think there's a lot that's been going on this offseason for both teams, and it's going to be good to get into it.
Absolutely. You know, we get to see each other twice this upcoming season, so why not add one more time in through the offseason? But in comparison between both teams, I'm going to start things off by asking you questions about the Los Angeles Chargers, giving Broncos fans a little bit of insight. Now, obviously, Brandon Staley, former Broncos outside linebacker coach, has taken over as the head coach of the organization. Obviously, was a defense coordinator for the Los Angeles Rams last year. What has the hype been around Brandon Staley? Because I know that you and the guys at Locked On Chargers, you've been pretty excited about what he's been able to talk about and what he's been able to do so far throughout minicamp and OTAs.
Well, I think it's just a breath of fresh air, first and foremost. Brandon Staley is very forthcoming. His press conferences are appointment television. I mean, it's just he's so much different than the previous regimes that the Chargers have had. Anthony Lynn's very old school, keeps things close to the vest. I mean, Mike McCoy had absolutely no personality whatsoever, as I'm sure you very well know with his ties with the Broncos. But Brandon Staley is completely opposite. I mean, he's very energetic. He's a very strong communicator, very intelligent, and that comes through in all of the press conferences and all the correspondence that he has with everybody. I think he's a personality and personnel relationship-oriented coach, and I think the players are really responding to that.
Well, let's talk about it this way, too, because he comes from the Vic Fangio coaching tree, which that defense has been very popular. Do you foresee any changes, maybe schematically, with the Chargers this year? Obviously, former Denver Bronco Chris Harris Jr. has played in this defense. He was on the roster when Brandon Staley was on the coaching staff. And obviously, Derwin James is returning. What kind of boost will that be in terms of maybe a new scheme and also getting those players fully healthy and back?
Yeah, I mean, as far as scheme, it's going to be completely different than the scheme that you saw the last couple of years. I mean, Gus Bradley deployed the cover 3 scheme, and it was very much, this is the scheme, and we're going to put the players in it, and that's it. And now in this defense is, hey, we're going to try to emphasize what our players do well, and we're going to put them in positions to succeed. They're going to use a lot of different personnel groupings, and they're really going to use a lot of misdirection. They're going to use a lot of shell. I mean, they're trying to make sure that they stress the offenses. They want to dictate to the offense what they are going to do and not allow the offense to do that in return. So it's going to be a completely different defense. It's a lot more sophisticated, a lot more difficult, but one all of the players have said they are extremely excited about. And as far as Derwin James is concerned, he's simply one of the best players at his position. And I think you're going to see him in that Jalen Ramsey star kind of role where he's going to be moved around a lot. They want to get him close to the football. I mean, Derwin James can do so many different things so well, and to have him back in this defense, I think, is going to be absolutely monumental to where they want to take this team this year.
Well, one question I'll have, too, because Melvin Ingram still a free agent, obviously leaving the Chargers, and maybe there's a chance down the road, especially as he remains unsigned. Maybe some point towards the season he comes back on a cheaper deal, but obviously there's a loss there. Now you factor in, you have Joey Bosa, who's had a variety of injuries throughout his career, and obviously some concussions have been a concern. I mean, what do you forecast for the pass rush position here for the Los Angeles Chargers?
Yeah, I mean, Joey Bosa, another guy, I mean, he has said, he had a press conference just a couple of days ago, and he said he's 100% healthy. He said he had a lot of lingering issues last year. He did mention the concussions. He's not having any effects from those whatsoever. He feels very confident. He's very excited about this defense. He has actually admitted that he struggled a little bit in it because it's a lot more complex than the defenses that he has had to do in the past. But he is excited for the challenge. I mean, there's going to be a lot more opportunities for him to make plays. I mean, you saw what Aaron Donald did and that number 1 defense that Brandon Staley ran last year. I think that's got to excite Joey Bosa. But, I mean, yeah, I mean, Melvin Ingram was the longest tenured Charger. I mean, he was there for a long time. He was a vocal leader, a guy that really, led by example. But we also have to look at it very plainly. The last couple of years, he just wasn't very productive, and he dealt with a lot of injuries. And, in the NFL, if you're not on the field, I mean, availability is one of the best abilities. And unfortunately, he hasn't been able to be available. And when he was available, he wasn't productive. And so when you get over the age of 30 and then you start not being productive, then unfortunately you have to, make way for other guys. And I think the beneficiary of that, or the guy who's going to benefit the most, is Uchenna Nwosu. I mean, he's the guy who has been waiting in the wings, has not been used, I think, nearly as much as he should be, but that's because Melvin Ingram was in his spot. And now it's his time to shine. He's in a contract year. I think he looks at Leonard Floyd and what Brandon Staley did for him in a contract year, getting him paid a lot of money. I think Uchenna is excited for that possibility to go out there and excel and really be that partner in crime with Joey Bosa. Also, they bring in Kyler Fackrell, who they signed in the offseason, who I think is just a solid player. He's going to provide some help with that. And also Chris Rumph is the guy that they drafted this year, is going to bring some fluidity, some speed to that pass rush position. I think actually is going to look a lot better because simply Brandon Staley is going to blitz a lot more. And also Kenneth Murray is one of their linebackers. He's really good at blitzing. He showed it in college. They didn't really give him the opportunity to do that. He's going to be able to play a lot more downhill, and part of that is getting after the quarterback. So I actually think the pass rush this year is going to be much more effective than in years past.
I'd be remiss if we don't start talking about the Chargers offense. Obviously, Eckler back, fully healthy. Justin Herbert entering year number 2 after a very explosive rookie season for him. I mean, obviously, the rookie offensive player of the year, rightfully deserved there. Obviously, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams. You look at the offense there, but, the skill guys are there. Everyone's returning, but they've made some additions on the offensive line. Obviously, Corey Linsley coming over from the Green Bay Packers there at the center position. Now, Rashaan Slater at tackle. What does the Chargers offense look like this year? And is there any concern about Pep Hamilton obviously being a departure? Are you worried for Justin Herbert because of that, or is it a perfect opportunity for Herbert to take the next step?
Yeah, I mean, looking at this offense, it's like the defense. It's just going to be a lot more complicated and a lot more sophisticated. I mean, one theme that you can see on offense and defense is the utilization of personnel groupings to attack that side of the ball that they're going up against. They're going to do that on the offensive side of the ball with Joe Lombardi and that kind of spine of the New Orleans offense. They said they're going to use a lot of the passing kind of concepts, but they're also going to try to infuse some of the running concepts from that Shanahanian type of tree, because they brought in Shane Day, the quarterback's coach, who was over with the San Francisco 49ers, and they have Kevin Koger, who is coming from the Green Bay Packers. So they're trying to take elements from some of the most successful offenses in the NFL and kind of try to tailor an offense specifically around what Justin Herbert does well. I think this offense is a lot more difficult. Justin Herbert has already admitted that. But with that, allows him a lot more opportunities to kind of get his team in better plays. So he's going to be able to look at the defense and really be able to decide what play to get them into. And he said they're going to have probably 6 or 7, 8 different plays that they're going to be able to go to try to check into. It's a lot more responsibility for Justin Herbert, but they got started installing that very early, and they actually asked Justin Herbert and Brandon Staley how far along the installation of the offense is, and they said they're already pretty much 90% installed at this point in time, and that the other 10% they're just trying to tweak for situations that they're going to handle or they're going to have to, be ready for when the season starts. So, I mean, I think you just look at it and you're really, really excited. They're going to scheme plays for Keenan Allen. They're going to get Austin Eckler to the ball. They're going to have Mike Williams in that X role where Michael Thomas was in the New Orleans offense. So, I mean, it's just about getting your best players in positions to make plays for you. And I think that's really exciting. And with the offensive line, that's the most exciting thing of all. I mean, you go out and get one of the best players at his position in Corey Linsley. You have one of the best tackle prospects in the draft fall into your lap at 13 with Rashaan Slater, which we did not anticipate. I mean, I remember on draft night when he started to slip, and that when he was starting to be a little bit more realistic that the Chargers could get him, I was like, hey, I don't care if you guys trade up if you get him. I mean, this has got to be the guy. I mean, but hey, that's why I don't make the money and I'm not the general manager. Tom Telesco, his patience, it won out. He had a great player fall to him in one of the biggest positions of need that completely overhauled the offensive line, which, I mean, some of the fantastic plays that Justin Herbert was able to do last year was because he had to go off script and that he didn't really have the time to make some of those plays. And that was just his athleticism. But now that he's going to have a much better offensive line in front of him to give him more time to open up the running game, to be more effective in the play action game, I think it's just going to be a more effective and more efficient offense this year.
Well, it's going to be something we're going to keep our eyes on. Obviously, covering the Denver Broncos. The Broncos trying to formulate that defense to be able to slow down Justin Herbert. Patrick Mahomes, we'll see if they can do that. But coming up here in just a moment, David's going to flip the script. He's going to ask me some questions pertaining to the Denver Broncos. But before we do that, folks, I have to tell you about the sponsor of today's episode of the show. That's our good friends over there, betonline.ag. And BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your sports action. You get all the latest news, odds, and info for all your sporting needs, including MLB, NBA, NHL, and all of your UFC, MMA action. Plus, as the NFL season creeps up, you're going to get that action there as well. Don't sit on the sidelines anymore, as this is your chance to get into the game as teams prep for their runs to the playoffs. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit when you use promo code LOCKEDON. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts.
All right, guys. Well, we are back here, of course, doing a little crossover action. I'm here with Cody Roark of Locked On Broncos. I'm David Droegemeier of Locked On Chargers. And the Broncos had a pretty interesting offseason. I mean, when you look at things with the rumors, I mean, with the Aaron Rodgers stuff, I think we got to start there. I mean, the Broncos has been a team that's kind of been rumored, to maybe be interested in Aaron Rodgers. I mean, coming from someone who covers the team very closely, was that just a rumor, or did that really, did it have any legs?
Well, the Broncos have interest, and that's one thing that George Paton, he hasn't shied away from saying. Obviously, a new general manager for the Broncos this upcoming season, a lot of changes since last year for the Denver organization. But George Paton said, hey, if there's a good player out there that we feel like can elevate our team, we're going to be aggressive. We're going to be in on every deal. We're not going to be, we're going to be aggressive, but we're not going to be reckless. And that's been the case. I mean, the Broncos, they inquired about Matthew Stafford when the Detroit Lions were up for trading him. They inquired. They didn't like what the Detroit Lions wanted to essentially receive in return. So they said, all right, we'll pass. They were never in on Carson Wentz, contrary to reports that people had put out there. The Broncos had no interest in Carson Wentz at all. But then, obviously, the Aaron Rodgers things around draft night started to circulate a little bit. The Broncos were interested, but the Packers, they have been firm. They have been telling teams, no, we are not trading the MVP. We want to keep him in Green Bay. He's either going to play in Green Bay or he's going to retire. So, anything could change at this point in time. And, David, I think that's the crazy thing about the NFL is we see these, teams that you expect they're going to have a quarterback on their roster for the entire career. We thought that with Aaron Rodgers. I mean, there's a real possibility that's not going to be the case. He either retires or at some point the Packers are going to budge and give in and say, okay, fine, we're going to trade you. Now, the interesting thing is Rodgers does not have a no-trade clause in his contract. So, essentially, the Packers, they could trade him wherever they want to. And if he didn't like it, he could retire, but he'd also have to pay back a lot of money. So, it's a tough position, I think, when I'm looking at it from Rodgers' end. But for the Broncos, there's been a lot of trade talk, about quarterback this, quarterback that. But to be honest with you, I've just been focused on the two quarterbacks on the roster with Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater. Obviously, the Broncos, they traded for Teddy Bridgewater the day before the NFL draft. And look, these two guys have been competing throughout OTAs, throughout minicamp, and they've been pushing each other. I mean, it's really close right now. You factor in Lock had several pretty good days so far on the scorecard, but it's way too early to say, okay, this guy's ahead of this guy. Really, the final determination, as Vic Fangio mentioned, it's going to come down to training camp and also the preseason games before the team makes their final decision as to whether or not it's going to be Drew Lock or Teddy Bridgewater in 2021.
Yeah, I mean, that was going to be one of my questions too, is that a real legitimate open competition right now? I mean, because from the Broncos perspective, with Drew Lock being the quarterback the last couple of years, you can't really look at his body of work and really be excited about, his prospects of being the starting quarterback going forward. I think it's been pretty hot and cold. Would you agree with that?
It's been hit and miss. There's been stretches that we've seen him play really good football, and we're wondering, okay, hey, if he can start stacking on and start being consistent, he can be the guy. Now, I still think that considering the COVID offseason last year, really the Broncos and not really getting a lot of opportunity to work together, especially having one of the youngest offenses in the NFL, that played a little bit of a role. There was no continuity as well on the offensive line, and that was an issue. There was a turnstile at right tackle with injuries last season. But for the Broncos this year, yes, there's going to be a right tackle competition. I firmly believe it'll be Calvin Anderson, who's proven to be ready. We'll see if that's the case. Bobby Massey, a veteran offseason addition for the Broncos as well. They brought him in. So there's going to be competition between he, Cam Fleming, Calvin Anderson, and Quinn Bailey. But outside of that, the Broncos offensive line is solidified for the most part. You factor in all the wide receivers. Cortland Sutton's coming back. He's had some pretty good games against the Chargers. I know he and Casey Hayward had some battles back and forth, but the return of Cortland's going to be huge. I think regardless for whoever the quarterback is, if the Broncos can come out this year and if they can run the ball consistent and that defense, which on paper right now looks unbelievable, if they can play well to the standard we expect them to, I think that the Broncos will be a pretty damn good team coming up in this division. But it's really going to boil down to, can the offense put up points? And that's been an issue for them for the last couple of seasons. They've struggled putting up more than 22 points per game. You have to get to the 29 to 30 range in the modern NFL that is today. So the Broncos have to do a lot more on their end. They have to reward the defense for getting takeaways or getting them off the field. And so it's really going to boil down this year, David, to the Broncos offense, which I feel like that's been the trend for the last 5 years.
Well, yeah, and speaking about that offense, I think we got to talk about the wide receivers, because I think you guys were really excited with some of the wide receiver weapons that you guys were able to draft, like KJ Hamler and guys like Jerry Judy, who had a really, tough case of the drops last year. I mean, looking at that position of the young wide receivers, who do you think is going to have a really strong year two?
And, I think Jerry Judy's probably going to be the best prime candidate for that. Now, despite the fact he played with 4 different quarterbacks last season, and he still had over 800 yards, but the drops were an issue. That's something he's acknowledged he's got to work on. He says that they're more concentration, which when you look at his route running ability, he gets open against everybody. It's about, I think he's looking to make a play before it even happens. Look the football in, get upfield. I mean, that's something that is fixable. It's correctable. And Vic Fangio has said that he looks more mature this offseason, and he really believes he's going to have a big breakout season. And it's going to be really hard for defenses to scheme because Tim Patrick's back on the outside. You mentioned KJ Hamler with his speed, Noah Fant with his speed and size as well. But you have Cortland Sutton, Tim Patrick, 2 6'4", 6'5" guys on the outside. Jerry Judy or KJ Hamler, their ability to route run and obviously create separation with their speed. It's kind of pick your poison right now. So if I'm Broncos quarterback, I'm saying, hey, look, I've got security blankets all across the board, whether it's Drew Lock, Teddy Bridgewater, or another quarterback.
Yeah, a lot of different weapons that can do a lot of different things. I think the Chargers are trying to do that as well. But moving over to the defensive side of the ball, I mean, it seemed like the Broncos in free agency really concentrated on improving the cornerback position and doing that with some established, proven veterans. Do you think that was a big point of emphasis going into this season?
Yeah, I do think that's the case because, you go back to that game against the Chargers, one of the final regular season games, and then the Raiders, the Broncos secondary was absolutely depleted. Yes, you had Kareem Jackson, Justin Simmons on the back end, but you were missing cornerback guys dealing with injury. So week 17, the starter was Parnell Motley, who was, made his debut against the Chargers in that game. He actually had a nice pass breakup against Mike Williams, but the Broncos, they were dealing with one guy, one starter was a 3rd-round pick, and also an undrafted rookie free agent who just came off of the 49ers practice squad 2 weeks prior in that regular season finale. So Denver's like, hey, we have to bolster our depth in the secondary. Obviously, they let go of A.J. Bouye. They released him, and now they've got Ronald Darby. They've got Kyle Fuller coming over from Chicago. Bryce Callahan is fully healthy, ready to go this year. And then you draft Patrick Surtain. You still have Michael Ojemudia. The Broncos are loaded right now at the cornerback position, which is great because we see in this passing league when you're going against teams like L.A. or you're going against teams like Kansas City, you have to have the personnel to be able to match up. And if you have one deficiency, that one deficiency can absolutely come back to bite you in the tail.
Yeah, and contending with the defense, that trend can carried over into the draft where, you guys had 10 draft picks and 7 of them were on the defensive side of the ball. From a defense that already looked like it had some strong components, why do you think they went so heavy on that side of the ball in this 2021 draft?
Now, we all saw it in the Super Bowl. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers absolutely shut down one of the NFL's best offenses, and it was a combination of having guys that could play man coverage one-on-one or even with some safety up over the top against Tyreek Hill, and then limiting Travis Kelce with what he could do with some rangy inside athletic linebackers. The Broncos have some guys on the roster to be able to do that, and also a pass rush. Von Miller is back. Bradley Chubb is fully healthy. Coming into the season, he should be. Obviously, he had off-season ankle surgery. He's going to be ready for training camp, but those two guys are healthy, and if this Broncos defense can stay healthy, David, the sky's the limit. They have real aspirations to contend based on their defense alone.
Yeah, and I think we can wrap it up with this. What does a successful season for the Broncos look like in 21? What needs to happen for them to reach that goal?
Well, I think you have to have consistent offensive play. You have to be able to put up points, more than 20 points per game. Your defense has to, you have to be able to reward your defense when they, get you off the field and they say, hey, look, you don't have to worry about doing it, because if you have a defense that can score points, like Vic Fangio defenses historically have the nature of doing, getting a lot of takeaways, it takes pressure off the offense, but they just have to be more consistent. Quarterback has to make better decisions. And that's really going to be the case for me. I look at the AFC West right now. Yes, Kansas City comes in as the favorite. I do think that between 4 teams, or maybe even 3 teams, maybe between the Broncos, the Chargers, and the Chiefs, I think things can open up a little bit, especially with an additional wild card spot opening up in the NFL playoffs. I think that the AFC West could have 3 representatives this year in the playoffs alone.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think both teams have made a lot of improvements this offseason on both sides of the ball, different schemes for the Chargers, different players for the Broncos, and we're going to have to see how that plays out.
Absolutely. And we're actually going to talk about the AFC West coming up here in just a moment. But ladies and gentlemen, I have to tell you about the other sponsor of today's episode of the show. That's our good friends over there at Built Bar. And Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar on the market. Myself, David, we love Built Bar. They have 9 amazing, delicious flavors, including the limited occasional flavor that you get on a month-to-month basis. The bars, they're covered in 100% chocolate, and they taste legitimately like a candy bar. Not only are Built Bars great tasting, they are also healthy for you. 17 grams of protein, only 130 calories, and only 4 grams of sugar. That is a perfect combination of dessert and also being able to eat healthy, folks. Taking something for a little bit of a pick-me-up. I eat one before I work out, or sometimes after I work out, or if I'm heading out the door in a rush. Built Bar is my daily go-to, folks. Peanut butter brownie. I want you to get your hands on a box of Built Bar today by going to BuiltBar.com using promo code LOCK15. That's going to give you 15% off your next order. 15% off at BuiltBar.com by using promo code LOCK15. All right, David, let's get into the fourth quarter action of today's crossover episode between the Broncos and the Chargers. Really just talking about the division in general. We talked about the Broncos. We talked about the Chargers. I had the privilege of having your boy Q on yesterday's episode of the show, and it's really unique to hear all the different insights, how people view the division. Now, the AFC West, I think we can make the argument, it might be one of the toughest divisions on football on paper. We always have this conversation every year, and one team ends up the record. It makes it seem like it's not. But I think that these games have always been competitive. Now, in your opinion, taking a look at the Raiders, taking a look at the Chiefs, what are your quick thoughts on them?
Yeah, I mean, looking at the Chiefs, I think you have to marvel at their ability to improve their team. I mean, their offensive line, what they were able to do with such little cap space that they have. I mean, that's absolutely incredible. I mean, it's like the rich get richer in that respect. So, I mean, the Chiefs, I think they're going to continue to be very difficult to contend with. But I like the Chargers' chances a little bit better this year with a more sophisticated, newer defensive type of minded head coach and an offense that's going to really be built around Justin Herbert and a better protected Justin Herbert. And then for the Raiders, I didn't see them do very much. I mean, I don't really like what they did in the draft. I don't, none of their draft picks really, say, hey,
they never make sense.
Yeah, their drafts are crazy to me. And I mean, it's got to be the John Gruden effect, but even before John Gruden, they had some crazy drafts. I mean, I don't know what they're doing on that avenue of football, but I'm not really too concerned with the Raiders. I don't think they've done enough to compete. I think the Chargers did a lot. I think the Broncos did a lot. I think the Chiefs did a lot. I mean, those 3 teams, like you mentioned, I think we're all going to be fighting it out. And I think this season, with what everyone has been able to do as far as those 3 teams are concerned, that is going to be a much, much more competitive AFC West than the last couple of seasons.
Absolutely. I think it's going to be fun. I mean, we've seen some slobber knocker games down to the wire. Obviously, the Broncos, Chargers, they split last year 1-1. The Broncos, unfortunately, got swept by the Raiders. And then the Chiefs and the Raiders, they tied up 1-1 as well. I mean, it was a really competitive division last year, regardless. In each of those games, there wasn't necessarily one big blowout. And, the Chiefs and the Broncos' first matchup, there was the 44-16 game, but that was really due to the offense. I mean, the defense really did good. The score has nothing to do with the defense, which is the odd part. And that's why the NFL is so crazy. But I look at the Chiefs and the offense. They still, they've loaded up. They've got, obviously, all their returning skill guys. They lost Sammy Watkins. Not much of a big deal for them, considering that they have a lot of depth at the receiver position. Travis Kelce's back. The running back game is a little bit more solidified. And then they've added on the offensive line. They get Lucas Niang this year. I mean, there's a lot of questions that I have about the Chiefs, which I'm going to get to on tomorrow's episode, Lockdown Broncos with Ryan Tracy. We're going to have a similar conversation here, but the Raiders, yes, I do agree with you. I think the offense will still be really deadly. A lot of question marks, though, on the defensive side of the ball. And you know this, Gus Bradley, former Los Angeles Chargers coach, he is now the defensive coordinator for the Las Vegas Raiders. What are your quick thoughts on that before we get out of here?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're going to be crying here pretty soon. I mean, they're going to realize that Gus Bradley does not change his scheme whatsoever. It's like I said before, the players are in the scheme and the scheme is what it is. They do not adjust the scheme to the players. The players have to adjust to the scheme, and they're going to realize very quickly that that's not going to work out very well, because if you don't make adjustments in game and from week to week against your opponents, then you're going to lose in the NFL. That is one of the big reasons why the Chargers had a lot of problems on the defensive side for the couple of years that Gus Bradley was here. Is you had to get personnel that fit the scheme and not the other way around. That's not how you win football in the NFL. You have to accentuate what your players do well. I don't think that's going to happen for the Raiders, and that's going to be a big downfall for them this season, which, quite frankly, I'm going to be very excited and happy to watch.
Absolutely. Well, David, thank you so much for sharing your insight on the Los Angeles Chargers and your thoughts on the AFC West. You guys can follow David at DroTalkSD on social media. Thank you so much, David, for popping in. Enjoy the offseason. We'll talk again once the NFL regular season comes in.
Sounds good, man. Looking forward to their crossovers.